All right, now we are welcoming on the founder and president of Prep Baseball, Sean Duncan. Dunk, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this with us. I know it's something we're all really excited about and something that we've kind of talked about for a few months, honestly, since starting this, is getting you on here and doing this with us. So I appreciate it.
Well, I'm grateful to be on. Longtime listener, and I'm glad I finally got the call to get on this show because I know you guys have getting on a lot of people, and it's been awesome to watch and listen. So thanks for having me on.
Well, and I was fired up about this when we were just shooting back and forth notes because, first off, the fact that it's 20 years kind of blew me away.
Me too.
Um, and what also blew me away was I started in 2015. So to think that I'm going on year 10 or like kind of halfway in the lifespan of prep baseball is wild to me. And I am so lucky to be a part of this company and to have you kind of mentor me the way that you did back in 2015 and showing me the ropes and really excited to just kind of talk about the history of Illinois baseball here, since the inception of prep baseball. So welcome on, Sean.
Thank you. I'm so pumped because it kind of like thinking back and just when we were downloading all these notes to talk about players to talk about and just the how many years it's been and just kind of taking me back down memory lane and the little bits of soul that you've lost on the baseball field when you're watching games with 43 degrees in the early part of the spring and guys, the strike pitch isn't in the house and you're sitting there having these existential questions about what you're doing. So this right here is kind of like validating my parking receipts, so to speak, for 20 years of scouting Illinois. Um, I made some calls around just to some Illinois baseball historians, like guys like Harry Torgerson, just who have been around the block three or four times, just like, hey, who are the best guys that you remember? And so was a lot of fun. Um, and I'm super excited to kind of just talk about players over the years.
Well, I think we get right into it. And we were talking about, hey, how do we, go about this? Because there's so many players and so many stories and so many good stories, not so good stories, whatever it may be. But starting off with the all-time greats that you've covered, I think would be a
Yeah.
great way to do it.
Uh,
Just the best of the
yeah.
best.
I mean, it's the top two stops and starts with Jake Odorizzi, number one, by far. And then number two has to be Michael Bowden from Wabanzi Valley in 2005. And Odorizzi was
We've got 2008 here at Highland.
2008. Yeah. So Odorizzi from Highland High School was a player. I mean, people know Odorizzi is kind of that touch and feel starter, in the big leagues. I mean, has had a 10, 12-year career or more. As but in high school, he could have gone to Louisville and been the starting shortstop. He would have been. So he was that kind of level athlete, stolen bases, could really hit, but on the mound, it was just it was statistically had to be one of the greatest seasons. He may have let one run up all season, pitched a lot, as you would imagine, being in Highland, smaller school in southern, the metro area, and just absolutely was unbelievable on the mound. And it's one of those few guys you look at and you're like, yeah, that guy's going to be pitching in the big leagues. And so he was just a freak athlete, and just did it in every facet of the game. And I think anybody who saw him in high school would probably say the same thing. And I just remember him pitching a complete game three hitter in the semifinal of the state tournament, and then when Highland got in the championship game and they got in a little trouble, they brought him in out of the pen to shut it down, a day after, and the Coach Hawkins, who's one of the all-time great quotes of all time, said to me, he's like, I had Secretariat in the stall ready to go, and we brought him out, and he probably threw like 8 pitches and none of which were under 94. And there was the scout that signed him was actually there, Harvey Keene, and the rest was history. I think he went 32 overall or something like that. And then Michael Bowden was the first year we started in 2005. And they don't build them like that anymore. And you probably know Bowden now as, isn't he a pitching coach at NAS?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we brought him back for the All-American game 2 years ago, just kind of an homage to the very first Cover Boy magazine. And it was super awesome to see. And he's probably 20 pounds thinner than he was in high school. He was just an absolute savage on the field, where a stone cold killer on the mound. People people wanted to nitpick the arm action back in the day, but the fact of the matter was he never walked a single. If he walked two guys, it looked like someone kicked his cat. And he hit 17 home runs and hit over 500 and did it against really good competition. So just from a pure competitor standpoint and talent, I mean, he did go in the sandwich round of the first round, or, the comp round, I guess you call it nowadays. So, and had a kind of a journeyman career in the big leagues, but just you probably see him as the pitching coach now, and you're like, hey, who is this guy? And that guy was an absolute killer on the mound. So,
and I grew up in Naperville in that area, and I was an '04 grad. So he was always that name kind of coming up. I didn't get to see his senior year in the dominance. I had no idea he hit 17 jacks.
Right.
But no, he was definitely a big name back then, and really cool to see him kind of helping guys out right now at NAS and coaching, and could not be like a more down to earth human being.
Yeah, and yeah, he's an awesome dude. Yeah, it's not a bad coaching staff they have over there with Jim Tomei
Yeah.
as the hitting coach. So I mean, in regards to the best hitters, you could cluster a few up near the top, but you got Tim Berry from Oak Forest. I think he broke all the records. Yeah, he broke all the records from 2011, I believe. He was just unreal. He had hit him so far. One of the things that I loved about Tomei's kid at the Future Games was he wasn't that famous of a name besides his last name, but when he hit, his head was so still. It's like the quietest head. That was Tim Berry, except he was hitting balls like 400 plus. And it didn't matter if it was 68 or 94, right? Like he hit anything. He was like a hitting savant. Now the problem with him was he could not even fake the funk in pregame defense. So like he just couldn't even like act like he cared on defense. So he really didn't, go to where he should have gone to that level. For all you guys, people out there, take pregame seriously, even if you could hit.
Well,
So
one story I have on Tim Berry is when I got out of playing college baseball, my first job was at Eastern Illinois as a volunteer assistant. And I remember walking into the office and they were watching, the coaching staff there, Sean Lyons and Skylar Mead, were watching a PBR video. And it was Tim Berry hitting in the max. So it probably was one of the first years that we transitioned to a website to where we actually had video, because he was maybe a junior at the time, because it was 2010 when I was there. But I remember exactly what you're saying, just launching balls and seeing it in the max, because you guys had a different angle that we were using back in the day too, where it was like from almost like shallow right.
yeah,
Does that sound right?
no,
And
yeah.
I'll never forget watching that video.
I thought we figured it out. Steve Nielsen and we had figured it out. We built this um, plexiglass screen that we put out, around short, depending on, but we had it deeper back,
Yeah.
and it was great until the unbreakable plexiglass broke a couple times. We try to fashion it refashion it again. But yeah, Tim Berry, zero effort, almost kind of static too, swing, and it was just uncanny. So
He just
he
always
was,
struck me as that grown man that grown man strength in high school too. Just
yeah,
like massive forearms, wrists, and yeah.
Captain Caveman in the box, and you know, right up there. Probably this best single season offensive season. I mean, you could put Tim Berry's junior and senior season up there, but Sam Travis's senior year, 2011, on that Pravi team, he was Player of the Year, and we're known to have kind of brutal spring seasons, cold wise. The 2011 spring like lasted through the end of May. It was just freezing cold all year, all spring long, and his numbers, we have his numbers were just absolutely unreal. And he did it in the Catholic blue, which is obviously like the SEC in the
Yeah, I'm digging these up, Sean. 75 RBIs.
yeah
504 in the CCL blue is 17 home runs, 17 doubles, and 75 RBIs with 53 runs scored. I've never seen that since
yeah
I've been doing it.
and he's just that blue collar hitter that and I remember like we were shooting when we had the magazine, I would do the photo shoots, and we were at Pravi for the preseason magazine, and you know I'm not a photographer, so I didn't bring any props, and we're like, oh crap, we don't have a bat for this photo shoot. He's like, I got a bat in my car. He comes back with like 14 bats that he just had in his trunk. And I'm like, what do you have 14 bats? He's like, I like to hit. I like to hit.
I love that.
That was it. So Tim, and obviously he had a great career at Indiana, was a second rounder with the Red Sox. So he's way up there. I would have to put obviously Connor Powers in 2006, another Player of the Year from Bennett High School. Just a born hitter. And the funny thing about Connor Powers, he was the unquestionably the him and Joe Benson in the 2006 class, the unquestionably best prospects there. But he did not commit to Mississippi State until like almost after his spring season, because everyone was like, oh, like, what's his body gonna be like in college? And there's like, does it matter? Like anyway, he ended up leading the SEC in home runs. So I guess, but it just goes like we're seeing eighth graders commit now, and the number one prospect and that dude that led the SEC in home runs didn't have a scholarship offer until like end of his senior year. So things done changed, Drew Locascio.
Yes, they
Things done
have.
changed.
Yes, they have.
Um,
And you mentioned like freshmen committing. I mean, now what's going on with, that not happening and everything else in the college game, it's continuing to change for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um,
And you get and just on the hitters topic. Sorry, I'm just kind of rambling. I'm
I love
excited.
it.
Um, you got to put Nick Martini in there in the 2008 class. He's in the big leagues now, still with the A's. I think he made his debut a year or two ago, but he went to Kansas State, Prairie Ridge, um, all-time great Super 60 performance. Just a great athlete, born hitter from the left side, and went to Kansas State. I think he was the Big 12 Player of the Year, and just a great all-around player, and just another kid that just didn't give a crap. Like just got in the box, probably no batting gloves, and just raked. Jake Smolinski's way up there.
That
Second round.
2006 class was loaded.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Connor Powers, Joe Benson, Jake Smolinski. I
yeah,
don't know. There's a lot of names on there for us
yeah,
talking about the best players to come through and
yeah.
having three in that class.
Yeah, he was unbelievable hitter. And then just one other one, less famous, but people in who were around at the time know Ryan White from St. Rita, 2005 left-handed hitting first baseman. Went to Purdue, had a great career at Purdue. Then I think he got drafted. I don't know what round, but just I remember at the Super 60 in '05, um, he was the hitter, and then we had there was a pitcher there. And back in the day, we would hit. It was a complete um, hazard. We'll never do this ever again. But back in the day, you were less afraid of getting sued, I guess. So we had 3 cages, all right, poorly lit cages, and all the pro scouts were behind these cages. It was a small facility, and we would go live in every single cage. And the pro scouts, the Scott Angler, who is he's like a special assistant with the Rangers now. He was kind of like my scouting mentor um, when I was starting, and he would be sitting back there, and he would be like, "Hey, let's get Rick Zagoni, who is like a lower slot 3/4. He went to Mizzou and played pro ball. And then and he was like, we would do matchups where it's like the best, left on left, matchups. There were a lot of broken bats in there, but when there would be like that favor invite pitcher who probably shouldn't be there, and he was, that's when I was like, oh, maybe this isn't a good idea because they're pitching not behind an L screen or behind any screen, and so yeah, we did not get there was no calamities there, but we survived. But
That was going to be a question from our group. Some of these guys were just curious how the Super 60 started, and I mean the fact that you got to it naturally is great. When it started, where you used to run it, what players were there, all that stuff.
uh,
Because
we,
those are
we
some good
yeah.
stories that I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it started in a barn actually in 2003. And we did the pitching in this gutted out barn, and there was no heat, and it was winter in Chicago, so it's freezing. And we had like this heater in there. And then we took the defense to this Montessori school gym, like just your standard, square gym, right? And needless to say, we ruined the walls at this Montessori school. But that was the beauty of back in the day, though. Like you had the area scouts showed up, right? To make a difference. You got players, the area scouts showed up, and that was really doesn't make a difference where you're at, as long as you have good players and there's scouts there. And then so it kind of, we improved it little bit by bit, year after year. So, but anyway, so I would put those guys as my. Oh, and then I guess kind of cut from the same jib, and more recent. This is more in your timeline, Drew. But cut from the same jib as Tim Berry, I would put Matt McCormick. You know,
Absolutely.
like since he was in 8th grade, he was hitting against varsity pitching,
Yep.
and just no batting gloves, no, not a lot of movement, but everything was barreled. 2-time Player of the Year, right? I think he was the only
At the
guy.
time, the first one.
Yeah,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so it's hard not to put him on because I mean he was just. But again, just a position. What position was it? So I don't know. What do you?
Left-handed hitter. I mean, I got a ton of looks on him, Sean. He was by far at the time my favorite hitter that had come through, and there's been some good ones since, but just a pure hitter in every
Your
sense
hitter.
of the word.
Any other hitters that I'm not thinking of?
Well, you've got Mark Payton on this list.
Oh yeah.
I know he put up huge numbers. And recently, like right now, coming through the system, Jaden Fauske is one of the best I've seen. As far as just pure contact, handling at bats, pitch selection, hitting for a high average, but also hitting for power, using the whole field. He is a pure hitter, but it's as polished as I've seen. So those are some of my favorite bats. I'm trying to see if there was any overlap we had on guys.
True.
Yeah.
You mentioned I was going to bring up Mark Payton later,
Okay.
but he's like one of my all-time favorite players. Period. Just undersized guy who just played the game the right way all the time, played hard, just could hit, always could hit, but he could also really defend and run, and just a real baseball player. So that was a good call out.
And I feel like his younger brother Jack is very similar. Can
Yeah.
really hit, knows how to play the game, has a crazy work ethic, just cut out of the right cloth, and all that guy's gonna do is just succeed in life, in baseball, whatever it is. So, just a big fan of both of those guys in that family. I mean, Drake Westcott was one of the best. He, as far as just intimidating bats in a lineup. Drake Westcott, since I've been doing this, like getting pitched around, hardly getting anything to hit. When he did get something to hit, he didn't miss. He had all kinds of power. He made high school fields look extremely small down there in Edwardsville. I was always a big fan of Drake Westcott. And got to see him play in a lot of meaningful games as well. Like he was never afraid of the moment.
He could smash, and he was one of those guys you could just tell, like the dudes that like being in the box and know that he's a dude. And he may have done that a little too much. No, he's a dude. Like, so when he hit a grounder, rolled one over, didn't like to get down the line very hard, but in regards to just pure hitter, like
Yeah.
he's 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So a name I'm seeing on here is Reed Roper, Sean. Like, what do you
Oh,
have on him? Because he was a
the
2010
Roper
grad.
brothers. Harrisburg back in the day was an absolute machine. The great Jay Thompson had those kids playing right all the time. I don't know how he got them, but they played hard, really hard. And the Roper brothers, Reed was a left-handed hitting shortstop who hopped on the mound, was 90 on the mound. Didn't say one of the quietest kids you'll find on a field. And he helped work an event or two back when we had run some events, so I'm personally biased. And then his younger brother, Ryan Roper, was a stud too. And then he went, I think he was the very first MVP at the Future Games, our first Future Games. Again, a two-way talent, could really hit. Probably better on the mound than Reed was, but both those two just were born to hit. That's a really good call out on the Ropers.
Well, and you start talking about two-way guys. Another 2010 grad here, Shane Conlon.
All right.
I think
So
he deserves a mention.
Shane Conlon, no doubt. I would put him as probably one of the all-time winningest players in Illinois history. So you being a Naperville grad, like before he was at Naperville, he was at Rita, and he led Rita, to a summer state championship, summer state championship, and then transferred to Naperville because that's where he's from, and then he won a championship at
Naperville Central, yeah, because
And I
that's
think
the rival.
he went undefeated. I think it was like 13 or 14-0. And oh, by the way, he was a great hitter. In fact, he was the Big 12 Player of the Year at Kansas State as a hitter. Just a stud to first baseman. And he was a guy that you watch guys nowadays who don't have the best, quote, stuff on the mound, but you're going to get guys out with the size of your right? And sorry, I don't know if that, I said and just knew how to pitch, knew how to miss barrels, and just knew how to outcompete people. And I think that gets lost in like the quest for tools, is the guys that know how to innately outcompete people. And he was one of them, just a born winner. So Shane Conlon he would be on my kind of top 10 all-time greatest, performer players in Illinois history. And I think we were talking about previously, like there's a clear delineation of like high school domination and pro prospect, right? Like, and some guys might not have had the greatest high school career, but you knew like going in, like this dude's different and he needs to be in a better player development cycle and all that stuff. And Peter Hammett, one of your old teammate, at your high school alma mater, Zach Birdie was one of them, right? Like first rounder out of Louisville, mid 90s with Harry Slider, and everything looked like it was, had, tons of horizontal movement with everything he threw. Strikes, iffy, I think he had a losing record, maybe even his senior year. And wasn't the number one or two pitcher, I guess, even on the team, or maybe he was the two. But we had him ranked in the top three because people don't look like that in high school, and you just need to get with someone who, no knock on whoever your pitching coach was, but I would have guessed that Roger Williams at Louisville is going to help him harness whatever he has. And his older brother, Nick, was, another first rounder who was one of the first like behemoth velo guys, right? Like, when, he's ringing 96, 97 and on occasion, you just didn't see that. You guys are like kind of all ho-humish, but 86, 88 was like real velo back in the day. And then when you'd ring the 90 bell, that was a really big deal. And Mike Fulton-Evans, from Manuka, I think he was before, some like the Corey Rays of the world. I think Fulton-Evans was like the highest Illinois draft pick since Honell in the early 90s. But I think he was picked 19th overall out of Manuka. And he's 6'5", easy, mid 90s. But he got barreled a little bit in high school, and you're like, how the heck does that happen? And obviously he goes, I think he's out of baseball, but at one point he was, the highest velocity starter in the big leagues, right? So, and that's. So there's a lot of those guys too. Illinois has a rich history. I think maybe like the fourth most drafted state in history of the draft, maybe, I think. And don't quote me on that to all the hundreds of thousands of listeners on this, but I'm pretty sure it was fourth or fifth, behind obviously California, Florida, and
The
Texas.
the fact we're a Midwest state and we're, even towards the top of those lists speaks volumes. Especially last year having 10 high school guys drafted, and you talk about these guys that have come through, Fulton-Evich and some of these other guys. Like a recent one that just seems to fit that mold that you're talking about to me is Noah Schultz. He was just an absolute outlier, unicorn, 6'9" lefty, one of the highest ceilings to maybe ever come through. But Peter Hammond, you saw him a bunch in high school. Like he didn't throw, a ton of no hitters. Like he would walk some guys, he'd get barreled a little bit. I want to say his high school team was around 500, and it had him and Ashton Izzy. Both were drafted out of high school. Both are having a ton of success in the minor leagues. So he's one that, when it comes to just being a different type of species, like he is right at
Yeah.
the top of the list for me.
And I remember I was at a tournament, and I was at the hotel of a tournament.
I remember this
And
too.
yeah, and
Yep.
Christian Knapchek's dad, who, by the way, Christian
We're gonna have to
Knapchek,
talk on
yeah,
him. Yeah.
one of my all-time favorite baseball players. He's like, dude, and this was when Noah Schultz was like a freshman or maybe early sophomore year, and we didn't have him ranked. He's like, hey, you don't have this guy on your radar. He showed me one grainy video, and I was like, holy beep, and like we don't have this kid ranked, and I think you were, and I
We had
think I
like never even seen the guy.
never seen him, never heard
Six
of
nine
him.
lefty out of
Yeah.
Oswego. Hadn't even heard of him.
And I'm like, can you forward me that video? And then I think I forwarded it to you and said, hey, we need to like get this kid to an event, get him on the track, man. And I know you did like a private workout, I think,
Yeah.
at some point with the TrackMan unit, and it was pretty special.
Yeah,
So
no, that is an unbelievable memory, and your name recall on all these players is something to behold. It's always blown me away. But yeah, no, that's exactly right. It was right at the infancy of when we were introducing TrackMan, so we
yep,
almost used it as like a test run. Like, hey, let's figure out how to use this. Let's get Noah Schultz on there, and the numbers came back pretty good.
yeah.
Yeah, he's still got a bright future, and I know he's climbing up the rankings list in the minor leagues and stuff like that. But that was one, and I don't want to jump around here too much, but you mentioned Shane Conlon, two-way guy, being a winner. Like Owen Murphy to me is at the top of my list as far as prospects, winners, two-way guys that have come through here in Illinois. Same grad class as Noah Schultz, the 2022 class, but Owen Murphy, Riverside Brookfield. I remember his senior year, like going back and forth with Shooter, just being like, we have Noah Schultz number one. We have Owen Murphy number two. There is not a better player in the state than Owen Murphy. Like, if I'm going to give the ball to somebody, but Shooter was always like, hey, the ceiling, if Noah Schultz pops, it's going to be maybe the best arm in the big leagues, So that's always the dynamic that we're playing with the rankings. It's, the floor versus the ceiling, and what do you value more? And I really enjoyed those conversations, but Owen Murphy put up the craziest numbers that I've seen since doing this. After McCormick was consecutive player of the years, Murphy was the next one. And his senior year, like we always talk about, he could have won player of the week every week. Like whether it was with the bat, the arm, like it was just crazy. So, high level stuff, high level competitor, two-way for Team USA. Just cannot speak highly enough about him, and we were lucky enough to have him on the podcast here probably 2 months ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when he was like the only freshman on the future game team.
Yes.
And I remember telling you that was my favorite pitcher on the team, and he was like 84, 86. But back then he had like a real 12-6 breaking ball. He was
Yep.
throwing a real true curveball.
And you might even be doing him more justice or kudos than like I think he was like 82, 85.
Yeah,
But you just really like the athlete and the spin and all that. The shortstops that pitch.
it's right.
Yeah.
It's what the great Sean McCann taught me that one. The shortstops who can pitch are the ones you need to go after, and it's true.
I love it.
Yeah. Anyway, so pitchers, let's get into pitching
All right.
because there's a lot of them. We already touched on the two greatest of all time, in my opinion, Odorizzi and Bowden. You know, this is a random one, but the people that were around know. This is back in 2011. Derek Thompson from Teutopolis. Is Teutopolis still good? The wooden
Oh
shoes?
yeah. Oh, there's
Okay.
still guys coming out of
Okay.
Teutopolis. They have like
All right.
3 arms right now that could be an ace of a team. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Because like back in they were just a state championship factory, and
Yeah.
he was one of those no doubt guys. Like you watch effortless 90 with the plus changeup. The changeup was unreal. Just strikes, 90% strikes, effortless 6-3 delivery. He got drafted 2 or 3 times, just couldn't get out of the small town mentality and never really materialized. But I think he won 2 state championships, and he was my number one ranked player in a really good class. So Derek Thompson's way at the top, and a really interesting story. I'll put interesting in air quotes on this one. It's got to be in your neck of the woods, Drew. Is Ian Kroll in the
Absolutely.
2009 class? Okay, so Ian Kroll, left-handed pitcher, pitched in the big leagues for 4 or 5 years. But as a sophomore, unreal, led Nico to the state championship game. I can't remember if they won or not, but at least the state tournament. And junior year, same thing. 4 pitches, strikes, easy, just just absolute savage on the mound. But then senior year, he was too much of a savage, apparently, right? Didn't like the coach, liked the party a little bit, apparently. Allegedly. Whatever happened, he got thrown off the team. Okay. And so he pitched in RJ Fergus's spring league, but I don't think he even pitched in the spring league. I think he was just throwing bullpens there, and managed to get drafted in the 7th round because, like, he was just unreal. So that was another guy of just like stuff wise, competitive wise, every box is checked. It's just, just the makeup, it always plays a factor. But that stuff that happened in high school, you kind of need some of that stuff in pro ball, right? Like, just, and he had it. So I know I think 5 or 6 years in the bigs. Dominating wise, Kyle Funkhauser from Oak Forest has to be way up on that list. His junior and senior year, it was, it was unreal. And obviously he went to Louisville, had a great career. Signability was always a thing. And that's why he went to college. And then I think there was a signability thing in when he was first eligible to be drafted out of Louisville. But he was, easy 90s. I think he had, I'm looking at the notes, 32-3, his high school career. And just, sometimes you go to a game and you don't know what you're just at the game, and sometimes you show up to the field and you're very pleasantly surprised. So went to an Oak Forest Lamont conference game. I heard about Kyle Funkhauser as a sophomore, so I went to check him out. But opposing him was a sophomore named Tyler J. And Tyler J obviously went on to be like the 6th or 8th pick in the draft out of Illinois. But like both sophomores going at each other, both like 84, 88. And it was just like, you leave a field sometimes and you're just like, I don't think I'm going to see something like that, and Tim Berry was hitting. So it was, and then the Bureau guy was there who didn't like anybody on the field, at the time. And I'm like, what do you mean? Anyway, it's a side story on that one.
No, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kyle Funkhauser was unreal. I'd put him up on the list. Who else?
Yeah.
Who else you missing? Jake Latz, another Lamont kid. His senior year was probably one of the most dominant senior years of history. 12-0, 82 innings, struck out 134. And I know it's too close to the draft. When you get to the state championship rounds, right? So everyone's got their names in, but anyone, I think there was one pro scout at the state championship game, but anyone who saw Jake Latz pitch his state championship game against Springfield Sacred Heart would know that that guy was super different. And I think he's kind of been like in and out of, up and down in the big leagues a little bit, but he had some arm troubles when he went to, but he was unreal when he was his senior year.
I know you were a big fan of Tanner Houck as well. I don't know if he was one of the most dominating arms that you've seen, so maybe we need to save him for later. Chad Green down there out of Effingham, correct? Louisville.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some names that are bringing back a lot of memories here. Ryan Sloan, to me, was one of the most dominant arms that I've seen as far as just dominating. He helped lead York to state 2 years in a row. I think his senior year, he was a little limited on innings just with protecting it for the draft and whatnot, but just struck out the world, could flat spin the breaking ball. Peter, I mean, you saw him a bunch of times, but he would hold mid-90s, Sean, like...
Yeah.
hold it while touching a 7. And Blake Walters was the same way. Blake Walters just absolutely dominated. And down there at Muhammad Seymour where he was, some of those guys that hitting in the 8-9 hole, I really feel bad for those guys seeing 99 coming at them. That was the firmest I think we've ever seen on the gun was Blake Walters.
Yeah, let's get into the recent guys, and then we'll hop into like
Cool.
the Glenwood arms.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So, I mean, Blake Walters, a lot of these guys we're talking about too are just high character guys. Some of these that I have on my list, like Owen Murphy, huge fan of him. Blake Walters comes from an incredible family. We talked about Mark and Jack Payton. Cameron Appenzeller, he's a fresh one here, Sean. But if we're talking about the 20-year lifespan, we got to throw him in the mix because it's as silky as I've seen since doing this. And he's got the total package, multi-sport athlete, like plays golf in the fall, plays basketball in the winter. All I've seen this winter, no pitching videos, just him dunking on guys. So
And
speaks
you
to his
know,
athleticism.
and you know what? Those videos help his draft stock
Absolutely.
more than pitching videos.
Yes.
So that's what some people don't fully appreciate.
Yep.
Yeah, I saw Appenzeller throw like a 60% pen at the Gators Scout Day and called up Shooter, and I told him, like, wherever you have Appenzeller, like, it's too low.
Yep.
Like, it needs to be higher. Like, it reminded me, it's different, right? Like, just the way it comes out of the hand, the slot, um, just the action on the changeup is just different.
Some guys that if we want to talk recent guys outside of those that we've mentioned, Jack Mahoney to me, Saint Viator, he was like Owen Murphy was an underclassman at the Future Games, came as a two-way guy, but his stock blew up when he got on the mound.
So at the Future Games, he was this freshman that he was on the radar as a shortstop, and then 2 weeks before the event, Rob Allison, because Rob Allison knows his uncle really well. That's our Iowa, Minnesota guy. Knows his uncle played pro ball and all that. He's like, I got a report that he's like been up to 88 on the mound. So we had one inning. We were like, let's just throw him in there and see what happens. Just see what happens. One inning, and everyone saw it. Everyone lost their mind, and rightfully so. And the rest is history. So,
Yeah, ended up going to South Carolina, had a great career there, was a weekend guy for them. And I know he's in the Rockies organization now and putting up good numbers in the minor leagues. And he
good.
was just an ultimate competitor, Sean. Like,
Yeah.
he wanted the ball and did not want to give it up. So I'm a huge fan of him. I think, if there's a guy that's going to make it, like I'd put a lot of stock in on him. Let's see. Anybody else I'm missing here? Drake Fellows was a little bit kind of as I came in. I just know he was a big name going to Vanderbilt. Goodness. Anybody else I'm missing on this list?
Let's get into the pitching factory that is turned out to be Glenwood Chatham, and it started with Phil Maton, who was like super middle relief guy for the last X years in the bigs. He was Glenwood was year in and year out. He came to the Super 60 and was unbelievable at 88, 90. And then he had his middle brother was a shortstop who was really good.
Yeah, Nick, right? A left-handed hitting shortstop.
Yeah, Dr. Seifert drafted him in the 5th round when he was with the Phillies, and then I'm surprised his youngest brother didn't.
He's in pro ball.
Oh, he is.
So
Okay.
he went to Coastal Carolina.
Yeah.
Huge fan of him. I got to see him a lot his senior year, just tracking him down for the draft, and was a low 90s guy, tons of strikes, super athletic, could really spin it. Went to Coastal Carolina, had TJ, bounced back from that, and I want to say he signed as a free agent. And I was peeking at some numbers recently because we were doing a kind of like a pro story on Illinois prospects doing good things in pro baseball, and he had good numbers this year.
Yeah.
So keep an eye on him. His story is not finished.
and of course Reed Detmers, right? So Reed Detmers, um, just an interesting story on him was like he went to this school called Nokomis, or no, I don't even know, I'm probably mispronounce it. And having done this for a really long time, I like to believe that I've heard of every single school in the state. Never heard of this, but one of like a small school coach was telling me like, "Hey man, like we faced this Reed Detmers kid at Nokomis." I looked it up. It was like 60 kids or something like that. And he's like, and you take everything you get with a grain of salt, sometimes. But so we chased him down, and then invite we just invited him to the future games. And he probably put forth one of the most um like who the heck is this kid type of moments at the future games, because like when there's small school and there's wherever Reed went to, I just
Nokomis, yeah.
imagine like like the lot there's like they go have to go to the bathroom in an outhouse type of thing. um I'm not saying that actually happened, but and he transferred to Glenwood, but at the future games, he was 86, 89, but the breaking ball, I mean, you saw it when he was at Louisville, and then, threw a no-hitter for the Angels, and I think the sixth pick overall, maybe. So he's, it was special. And it was one of those things when he was at the Super 60, he threw one of the most pristine bullpens, like 100% strikes, 3 pitches, and he didn't get drafted. And I was like, well, why not? There's like, well, let's see if he could get more velo, in college. You're like, well, he's going to get more velo. Like, like why not just get it now? And then it's either and I think not the same year of the Super 60, but one of the all-time kind of Super 60 performances um, along the same pathway of Detmers was Tanner Houck. Um, I think was it the 13 class? I know it was in the same class with Zach Birdie. What year was that, Hammett?
13.
2014?
13 for
14. Thank
Birdie.
you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
On this
Um,
list, we got it 2014.
yeah. I mean, he was unreal at the Super 60, and it was just electric. And I remember a cross checker asked me, like, who do you like? And I'm like, that guy. And he's like, he's an open toe, heel strike guy. His arm's gonna blow. And I'm like, all right, well, did you watch what the ball was doing? Um, and then he went and proved it at Mizzou, and now was an all-star this year, right? And his doppelganger was from the same high school. Xander Muth was like,
Yeah.
it was like, I felt like when I saw Xander Muth as a sophomore, I felt like I was watching Tanner Houck. I mean, the arm action, the movement, the athleticism, size.
Was Houck, was he Collinsville?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay. It's
Muth was
East.
Belleville East,
Yeah.
but just, I mean, we talk about arms factories, and I want to go back to Glenwood because there's a few more, but the Metro East is just, they pump them out. Every year there's a high-level guy, it seems like. But you mentioned Reed Detmers. Parker Detmers was one of my favorite arms as well. His younger brother down at Louisville. Now, Reed had the beauty of being born left-handed, and Parker's right-handed. But Parker's got the workhorse frame. He, like Reed, throws nothing but strikes, can really spin it. Reed is one of those guys you never know if he's given up 7 runs in an inning or struck out 7. Just as even keeled as it gets. And Parker's kind of the same way. But huge fan of him. I think there's still a lot to come with Parker Detmers. Their middle brother was also really good. Went to Millikin, was one of their top arms at Millikin. I know that's not Louisville or the draft. And then we've got Appenzeller right now at Glenwood as well. So it is kind of nuts here the last 10, 12 years, Sean, what's been coming out of that school.
And Drew, Dylan Huff, too, is a
That's a great
2026
call
from
out,
Glenwood.
Gavin. So Sean, it's right-hander, 2026. He was at the Future Games, but it's a long, levered, quick arm, and he can really spin the slider. And I think there's big things to come for him. Still uncommitted out there in that 26 class too.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, and you touched on the Metro East
yeah.
in the St. Louis Metro East. I mean, there's so many of them. Brian Hudson. Um, if you want to watch something interesting, Brian Hudson showed up to our underclass invite. I forget, and he looked like a baby giraffe, but he had the stride length of like a 4'5" pitcher, and he was 6'7". And we're just like, if someone just needs to get with him and get a little longer, and all that, but um, he figured it out, and he figured it out in a really he was he went from like kind of like a like under the radar guy to every special assistant and scouting director coming in to Alton to see him. But I think this year he started working with a guy I know here in the St. Louis area, and um, I think he was like one of the most valuable middle relief pitchers in baseball this year, which is awesome to see.
It's wild how some of these guys, 8, 10 years down the road, like they figure it out, and you hadn't heard of them for a long time, and then all of a sudden Brian Hudson's in the big leagues.
Yes.
It's nuts, and it's some guys that like don't even really get mentioned. Drew Gray, he was a Belleville East guy. I saw him first as a position guy, and then I remember you seeing him as a pitcher one summer and shooting me a text, like, "Hey, he's sitting mid 80s and it's clean as a whistle." And he ended up transferring to IMG his senior year. But that's a high level arm that's come out of that Metro East area as well, at least in my time of doing this.
Yeah.
But Drew Milas out of there, I know he's not an arm.
No,
Apparently yeah,
he's unreal. He was
yeah.
unreal. Like when he came to it, he was a shortstop behind the plate. He was that athletic switch hitter. Belleville East. They had another kid that I went to see. That went to Vandy but didn't pan out. That was mid '90s too.
Well, Waterloo, Eric Kaiser at
Oh, thank
Waterloo.
you,
Is that who you're
Waterloo.
thinking of? Because now
Yeah.
he's helping Brad Huber down there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Eric Kaiser, really strong arm. That was one of my first like trips going down was to check out Waterloo. I got to see O'Fallon. I got to see Edwardsville. I mean, Trey Riley out of Edwardsville had one of the
Oh, yeah.
strongest arms to come through. But one of my favorite and I think we all have like all-time favorites or guys that for whatever reason just we like them. I know Defaball's got a couple guys, but Hayden Yanger, it's pronounced or it's spelled
Yeah.
Juenger. I called him Junger forever, but yeah, Hayden Yanger was one of my favorite guys, and just another high-level arm coming out of that
Lo-
Metro East area. And
Loved
I
him.
know we're forgetting guys as well.
Yeah. I mean, we got to close the loop on some of the all-time great pitchers because I don't want to leave out. There's in 2009 class, Scott Firth out of Stevenson High School. He was another like one of those freaky athletes, with an uber quick arm, who was pushing, low 90s velo when low 90s velo wasn't seen. But like what always separates the good from the greats is velo will be there, or if it's not, it's always the secondary and the strike pitch, and had it all, 3 or 4 pitches, all strikes, all the time. And maybe these are like my favorite guys because you could, strike throwers means a quick day at the yard for you instead of the non-strike throwers. But Scott Firth he went to Clemson, and I know he was a pitching instructor doing, and I don't know I have lost track of him now, but he's a stud. Jake Junis, I think he's still in the big leagues, 2011 in the Rockford area. He was more a shortstop than he was a pitcher back in the day, but he was awesome too.
You got a guy here on this list that I remember you talking about him in the office, Ryan Barucki.
Oh,
Like Scott Firth, a north suburbs guy, northern burbs
yeah.
guy.
So Ryan Barucki, I had known him forever. His dad, his family played in our fall league back in the day, and he was always those, you know, before the advent of like all the throwing programs and the velocity development programs, right? You just like, oh, either you have velocity or you don't. And if you don't have it, like, what do you have? And because you needed, validation of, a said ranking, right? And Ryan Barucki was always 80 to 83 every single time. You're like, he's gonna pop, he's gonna pop, he's gonna pop, and never did until he hit a growth spurt his junior year and his giant feet and hands he finally grew into. And then all of a sudden he was 6'4" and still uber athletic and with a whippy arm. And then he went from like 0 to 100, and then he blew out. He didn't blow out. He had an elbow problem his senior year, and but he had done enough at the Super 60 where the Blue Jays took him, I think in the 10th round or 12th round, something like that. But it was just that, from a scouting perspective, it's like, that's right. It doesn't look, the numbers aren't reading the way they should just yet, but it's going to be like unreal back in the, when things start to click or you hit a growth spurt or puberty or whatever. So, but yeah, Ryan Barucki, one of the all-time great Super 60 performances.
Well, so all right, we've had a lot of, the Midwest maybe isn't known for having like high level athlete infielders as much, as much as like California or some other states, but who are some of those guys that really did it for you, up the middle of the field?
Um, yeah, if, I think there's two guys that really come to mind, out of the gate. The first, I think the best defender, like you just watch it, you're like, yeah, you don't see this in the Midwest. Because really, the Midwest is real. You don't, as you mentioned, you don't see, you go to Florida, you see him on every single field. Like it's pretty scary. But um, here, I think Ed Howard was, you're just like, yeah, if you could hit like a little bit, you're gonna be a mega guy, and he showed enough. But defensively, it was poetry, right? It was just beautiful, and I don't know what he's doing now. I know the Cubs took him
Yeah.
super high,
Kind of
but
trying to figure it out in pro ball at the bat.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
defense, I'll never forget seeing him as a freshman. After you had watched him, you're like, hey, this is Ed Howard guy. And I remember watching pregame infield, and as a freshman, he was playing second base. But it was as smooth and as easy and as just that's the way it should look. And I couldn't believe I was watching a freshman at the time.
yeah.
And it just continued to elevate. Like the frame got even more impressive, and all the tools just continued to pick up as he got older. But
And
that's a great one to start with.
Ed Howard, and then probably the best pure shortstop, when you factor in all the tools, um, is Charlie Donovan from Lamont High School,
Westmont,
2015
We-
Westmont.
from
Yeah,
Westmont High School.
yeah. And he was the most unassuming looking kid, probably 5'9", didn't have a hair on his face, didn't look big, um, left-handed hitter that had like that different kind of juice in his hands. You ever see, like the Alec Thomases of the world, right? Like where it's like you're skinny and small, but the ball's going 400 plus. It's like people have just something different in his hands. 6'5" runner, mid 90s across the infield, didn't break a sweat doing it. It was like a comp would be like when you look at like Trey Turner when he was starting out, right? Like it's just like you tell me this guy's the fastest guy in the big leagues and has that kind of power. Obviously, not obviously, but it was probably one of the most tragic stories of all time. He passed away in shortly after his senior season, but he was a two-time, one of the only guys that invited twice to the Super 60, him and Jared Kelenic. And he was just a ninja with the bat, and effortless defensively. He had every tool, and just a quiet competitor, just a stud. Um, he was unreal. And there'd be no doubt he'd have been playing in the big leagues. Christian Knapchick, I would, I would have to put in my all-time favorite list. Just I remember when Eric Snyder committed him as a freshman, and he literally was 110 pounds, in his uniform and 5'7", and I was like, really? Like, and then she's like, just watch, and just something. It just that baseball clock, and just how he comports himself on the field, never takes a play off. Just his ability to put the ball in play and get on base, steal. Defensively, it was hit to him is automatic out. And it's kind of like the strike pitch as a pitcher. Like, that's kind of what you want. It's automatic, when it's hit to him. So I'd put those three guys as kind of like my all-time favorites, middle infielders. You got any?
I mean, we're sharing one in Christian Knapchick. I mean, I would pay money to watch him defend all day. He's that basketball player playing shortstop where he's just got so much bounce. The range was through the roof. He could make every play. He could throw from every angle. He played best on the move. And kind of what you were talking about, like those guys that the ball jumps off their bat, Alec Thomas, but like Knapchick, way more juice in the bat than you would ever think, given his frame. Like, he created some whip and just some jump off the barrel, and huge fan of him. And I know he's gonna kind of do his thing in pro ball now, after a really good career at Louisville. So he's up there. If we want to just talk like athletes, I've got a couple favorites because you mentioned Alec Thomas. He's definitely up there, and Dylan Head for me. I don't know how much you got to see Dylan, but Homewood Flossmoor, and one of those guys that as an 8th grader came to the junior future games. Him and Ragsdale were patrolling the outfield one year. Fred Ragsdale, who was committed to Kent State, now I think he's at South Suburban, but no balls were landing that year in the outfield. Dylan Head just flat could play center field. His stock continued to go up as he went through high school. The bat continued to elevate. I don't know if I've gotten better run times down the line, Sean, than I did on Dylan Head. Like, ground balls to second base, he's running a 3.9 down the line. He'd bunt and it'd be like a 3.69, almost to the point where it has you questioning your watch.
Oh yeah.
It's times you never get. And so Dylan Head was a special talent, Clemson commit, and he was one of my all-time favorites. But Alec Thomas, he was another underclassman at the Future Games, my first Future Games, and just a special athlete.
So
Had
Alec
the it
Thomas,
factor.
like when he came in when he was entering his freshman year, and Mount Carmel has to have the richest position player history. Mount Carmel, Coach Hurry, shout out. But he was so famous coming in, obviously, because his dad was the strength coach at the Sox and all this. And then I remember sitting at the black and silver or area code underclass tryouts, when you have to sit through 300 players to see one or two, right? And Alec Thomas is the first time I set eyes on him. And I'm like, oh, this is the guy that everyone's talking about. And then, because he's small, he was so, and wasn't not even a big, not obviously he's strong now, but back in the day he was small and skinny. But at UIC, he was literally, he put a ball across the street and hit right field and hit like the dormitory, and I was like, how? It's just the laws of physics do not merit that, right? Like, there's, his size, his strength, and the ease of the swing. Then he has just got something different in his hands. And then, he was a top of the scale defender in center field. Like, that to me is like, I know people kind of devalue outfield defense, except maybe center field. And when you see someone who does it differently, it was so different and it was so special. The jumps, I mean, you saw, on Team USA, he was the center fielder, and you had Kellenick in right, and you had Mike Sione in left, who was a starting center fielder in the big league or with the Cardinals last year. So I mean, he carried himself like my is bigger than yours, and what are you going to do about it? And sorry, I used that word again. But that should be something on the scout card, right? Like the guys that carry themselves like that. I guess that's probably in the character. But he is my all-time favorites, and I guess the biggest freakazoid, if we're talking about athletes,
Yeah.
the biggest freakazoid and probably my biggest miss, and this is for Tyler, Gavin, and Peter, when you're scouting, you get like some intel and you kind of blow it off. You could turn out to jump you and bite you in the butt, and that's Cole Kmet. So one of our area scouts, Matt Hawk, who's now with the Blue Jays, the huckster, went to a St. Viator game, came to the Viator game, and was like, he's a football player. He's a 5-star recruit, tight end, like number 1 tight end in the country. So, but he's really good baseball, like upper 80s, low 90s on the mound, pitcher, but also people are coming in and seeing him as a hitter. They like him as a hitter. And I'm like, yeah. And so we had him ranked like 80th, right? Like, and so Viator makes it to the state tournament. So I'm there. I see him for like 4 games. And I've never seen a species, a high school baseball player. First of all, he looked like he should be in the NFL tight end in high school. Like, I've never seen forearms. I've never seen a high school kid look like a kid look like that in a baseball uniform. And he's playing center field. He's tracking balls down. Then he gets on the mound, and he's unreal. Like, it just, there's nothing he couldn't do. And he hit the ball like 80 grade power. Like, seriously, 80 grade power in BP. And they won the state championship. And we're congregating I'm on the field, and I'm talking to Cole, who's like and he's also a stud of a kid too, like, and I feel like this big bear paw comes on the back of my shoulder, and it's his dad, Frank Kmet, who played in the NFL for a bunch of years. And he goes, "You still think he's the 80th best player in the state?" And I'm like, dude, like, I stand corrected, and I think he finished second or third in our rankings, but like he would be 1 if I knew he would have. And then he actually went to Notre Dame, and some ACC coaches. I remember the Wake Forest coach called me. He's like, "Who's this?" He's like, he didn't get in at a bat, but during warm up, like pregame, he was like launching balls out of the stadium. Who's this Komet kid? And I'm like, yeah, he's like, they're using him as a pitcher now, but he would be in the big leagues. No doubt he'd be in the big leagues. Anyway, he's
doing one thing or another, right? Whether it was with the bat or with the arm, because they were both extremely high level.
It had to have been the bat.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
It's just,
I mean, at least for him, he was a left-handed arm. He was one of the unique ones, left-handed arm, right-handed hitter, like the Connor Essenbergs of the world that are coming through right now. I'll never forget that story, because that was kind of right when I started too, Sean. Was kind of when all that was going on, and we didn't really know how invested he was in baseball and all the dynamics to it. And I still talk to Coach Mano about it. So Coach Mano's now at Lake Zurich, coaching over there. There's a name on here. Well, if we want to talk kind of freaks, I think George Wolkow deserves, to be on that list, especially reclassing up a year younger. So he was like the youngest guy in the draft, but they don't make him like George Wolkow. Had plus tools kind of across the board, whether it was power, arm strength, could run for his size. Gosh, he'd probably make a heck of a tight end too if he wanted to play some football. But he was one. There's one guy on here that we haven't mentioned, Corey Ray, because I know he was a really famous name coming through. If there was anything on Corey Ray that you wanted to mention,
Oh
Sean,
yeah,
but a 2013 grad.
Corey Ray, like he was like one of the first like famous like seventh graders, and this was right at the beginning of the ACE program, and there was Corey Ray and there was Darius Day, who was a year older but a tick more explosive, I would say. Um, and I remember Nathan Durst was kind of the who kind of birthed the whole ACE program. Did a private workout at UIC for his ACE guys, for just for me. So I sat there and ran through them all. Like these were just eighth eighth graders and one seventh grader, Corey Ray. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Like he's unreal. Left. But the thing about Corey Ray is he could always hit, and he always hit, and it was special. But he never could run. Like he was like a 7.3 runner growing in, and he ran a 7 flat at the Super 60, which was probably his best time. And then so people didn't, shoved him down on their boards because of the run. And he had his senior year, he was unreal, like offensively. And I think he got a courtesy 32nd rounder, I think that by the Mariners, maybe. And he goes to Louisville, and a freshman scout day, he's running 6.4s, right? And then it was the legend of Corey Ray, and we brought him back as a coach for the All-American game too, as another homage to some of the legends of Illinois. And but he still looks like, by the way, he could play.
He's the mannequin. Yeah.
He is the mannequin.
Yes. I didn't know that's what happened to him. I didn't know it was the run tool that just ticked up at Louisville that turned him into that top 5 type of draft that he was.
And it didn't tick up. It was like, it's analogous from someone being like a mid 80s guy to like upper 90s guy.
That's
like
crazy.
in a matter of a year. So it's amazing what some proper training will do. So yeah, Corey Ray, a legend.
I personally have touched on all the names that I was wanting to. I don't know if anybody else on this call had anybody that they saw that we missed or wanted to call out.
Well, one of the all-time guys that have had success in the big leagues. I think this is a pretty noteworthy and interesting story, and it's a really good story for players that weren't known at all, and that's Paul DeYoung, right? And Paul DeYoung now is a kind of a journeyman middle infielder now, but for a 3 or 4 window span, he was the highest WAR shortstop in the big leagues, right? So, which is unreal.
Yeah, that's wild.
So back in the day, I think this is like around 2010, I used to run like this fall league, and it was an unbelievable program. Took large chunks of my soul because, just getting rosters there. But we played doubleheader games at Oakton. Then I brought in like college coaches for 2 college camps. I enrolled them into a tournament. So it was like this pretty comprehensive program, fall league that I ran. And then thankfully handed it over to Steve Nielsen the second he walked in the door. But so I like to have believed that I knew every single player in the state of Illinois, that could play. And there was this kid in the league named Paul DeYoung from Antioch, which is way as you guys know, it's way the upper northern parts of the state,
Yeah, it's
right?
touching the border, I want to say.
Yeah, it's touching the
Yeah.
border, and it's not a lot of players come out of that neck of the woods back in the day. I don't know what it's like now. But so I've never heard of this kid. He starts to hit, and it's pretty good. And I'm like, hey man, like, what's your story? He's like, I'm going to the University of Illinois as a student. I blew out my knee last year, so people haven't seen me. So he missed the Stevenson showcase and all that. So as the league wears on, all he's doing is hitting doubles to the left center, right field, center gap, and his bat is in the zone for a really long time, and it's super flat. So I'm like, holy crap! Like this kid should not be going in as a student anywhere. So at the time, the old coaching staff at Illinois State we were super close with, and Bo Durkak was I had a really good relationship, and I would just give him tidbits. And I'm like, I call him up, I'm like, hey man, like this Paul DeYoung kid, you should walk him on, and could be a super utility. I would try starting him as a catcher. But he could play third, second. He just can't play short because he's a 7.5 runner. He was a 7.5 runner. So shows how much I know. So he goes to Illinois State, and they try to catch him. And his freshman year and sophomore year, they put him in the infield, and the rest was history for that kid because he did it I think he was a third rounder out of Illinois State, even though he still didn't really run. But, you know, what we were talking about, like the ball's hit to you, it's an automatic out, you know? But anyway, he was going to Illinois. He was going to the University of Illinois as a walk-on. And so, yeah, I'm super happy for him because he deserved it.
Well, I knew that story. I knew parts of that story. I didn't know he was planning on just going to school and giving up baseball.
Well, nothing came. Obviously, he was hoping something would come out of our league, but it was me telling Bo, like, dude, just walk him on. Like, because back in the day, like, if you hit on a walk-on, that's like a really big deal for mid-major schools. Yeah, there's just so many guys over the years, and it's so fun just kind of going down memory lane. There's names on our list that I get chuckles out of. Like you put down on the list, Chucky Robinson.
Oh yeah,
Danville.
Yep.
Who's I don't know what I know he was playing pro ball for a while as a catcher.
He got a taste of the big leagues.
Yeah.
I know he got a cup of coffee. And Tyler, he was with the Reds. We were chatting on him. I'm not sure what he's doing this upcoming year.
I want to say he's in the White Sox farm system now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But he was a legend down there in Danville. I know I spent a couple years in Danville, and he was the name. And tons of tools there, too. Big arm and strong and had power. And I mean, I know there's plenty more names that we're not talking about. You want to talk about ultimate performers at the high school level, like Mike Madej, Providence Catholic. He was a favorite. I had to throw him out there.
Yeah. Player of the year.
What's that? Yeah, player of the year. Dominic Vagley, who we just had on, another guy that just was a high-end performer, and he's gone on to Kansas and just performing. Lucky enough to have him on the podcast a little while ago. So many names we could go on and on. The Tyler Bells of the world, the Brendan Summerhill. Like, keep an eye on that name. Coming out of Arizona this year in the draft. The Mangieri boys, out of Central Illinois. I had to throw them on because that family. I know they maybe didn't play baseball at the next level. Some played football or whatever, but that was just kind of a freak family as far as just being built all like NFL linebackers or something.
Yeah.
I didn't realize Chad Green was from Effingham. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
He's had a good career.
And that was the year what year was that? Was like that was
2010 it looks like.
2010. Yeah.
Full
And that
debit,
was, yeah,
common.
but that was the year that Louisville, when Lamonis was the recruiting coordinator at Louisville, he just started slaughtering um, the like Southern Illinois and Indiana, and he put me on to Chad Green, and it was really really good. But yeah, Chad Green was unreal. Um, and then you put a name on the list. Um, who was a legend and then had one of the statistically senior year, he looked like Big Poppy in the box. Bobby Seymour,
Yes.
uh, just was huge coming in as a freshman, and just like, how do you get this guy out his senior year? And went on to be an all-time great at Wake Forest, and he's still in pro ball, I think.
Oh yeah, no, and he's excelling in pro ball from what I've seen. And I remember Sean, you seeing him his senior year and coming into the office and just being like, "That's the most locked in hitter that I like." It's something along the lines of like that guy is so locked in. There's nobody more locked in the state. And just about how impressed you were with him in that one look. I'll never forget that either.
Yeah, yeah, he's like,
Um,
pitchers make good pitches, and he's like not even like flinching at it, and it's like, okay, and then it's in the zone and it's smashed.
yeah.
So Mount Carmel,
You kind of threw that out there. Like Homewood Flossmoor's had a lot of guys come through. Outside of that CCL Blue and some of these other programs, Glenwood, it's just crazy what they've had come through there. I feel like Lamont's had their fair share of high level guys. We could probably go on and on with high schools. I can't believe your player recall, Sean. That is just listening to that is like it's a sight to behold.
well, yet I can't remember to take out the garbage, and my wife reminds me that on a weekly basis. So I need to like control alt delete like 2017 and below, and just because it's taking up a lot of brain RAM, and so it's impeding other functions of my life that is making some other people unhappy in my life. So I need to delete some of it.
That may be two of us. I could do a better job with that too. So
Yeah. Oh, and one last two-way guy, and I got to throw it out there because he's one of my all-time favorites. This is back in the 2005 class. Kenny Smalley. You ever hear that name?
I don't know if I know much on that
True
name.
two-way guy. Um, didn't like school all that much. He was going to go to Southern, then he went to JUCO, and then he went to Delta State. But just another two-way guy, who could really, really hit and chuck it. So yeah, there's so many of them. There's just so many players, and it was a lot of fun just to kind of spitball names. And if we didn't mention you, I'm sorry. Like we didn't even get to like the Jake Godfreys of the world. At Providence when he was a sophomore and junior, or Kevin Koziel at Brother Rice, who was maybe the best freshman I've ever seen, and Ryan Koziel, who had a
Yep.
play pro ball, the Koziel brothers. So there's so
Michael
many.
Massey's not even getting a mention on here, and he's a big leaguer with the Royals. Like, there's so many guys to mention, which speaks to just how good Illinois has been over the last 20 years. And I feel like it's only continuing to get better here, Sean, as like we continue to see these classes come through. It's really impressive.
So I want to say, when you drop Michael Massey single-handedly was one of the first people to change my scouting perspective, because he was so good for so long, and he never struck out, wasn't flashy, didn't have big tools, didn't hit for power, but he was an amazing baseball player. Always had him in the top 10, but when the new shiny toy popped up, it always kind of leapfrogged him, right? And I remember having this discussion with his dad via email, and um, and it's like the people that are really, really good at baseball who could hit at high levels, and the power is the power is going to come, and the baseballs the baseball IQ with tools, with the hit tool, that guy's going to ascend.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's in the big leagues, I see it. And he's a starter, and it still pisses me off that I screwed that one up. But it's like there's always a guy that kind of changes your, like, hey, baseball scouting, there's no like we want to like kind of cookie cutter it like into buckets and like comps and all that stuff, but like the advent of bat to ball skill and true baseball player, and obviously you need some athleticism too, but I mean that's huge part of it. But as we were talking about, that could be the twitch maybe not coached up, but that definitely foot speed can. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, the Michael Massey was a name that I still am pissed at myself about.
But it is so hard when we do this because you always want to look at positional profile and positional value too, right? And he was always a second baseman, as far as I had known, and to be able to say, oh, this second baseman needs to be top 3 in the class, or you just don't get that very often. Which
And his Royals teammate that he just got traded was Nicky Lopez, too, right?
Naperville Central, correct?
Naperville Central, and
Yep.
I'm like, he's too small. He's too small, and he's this, he's that. He's a ninja with the glove, so he's got like one double plus tool, and can you teach the others? And he went on and had a great college career. But or the Nick Solaks of the world, where
That's a
he's
good
just
call.
like, hey, he doesn't run that great, but he can really hit, and he can really fields everything in his way. It's like he's a great baseball player, and that's as I got older and doing this, and I'm not saying I'm a great scout or anything, but like you stop concerning yourself with what other people think, and then you just rely on what you think. And I should have had certain players ranked higher, but the industry wasn't sharing the same sentiment. The Masseys or the Nick Lopez's. Like, oh, he's too small, and then because those are the tools that are hard to really coach. It's like,
Mhm.
do you know how to play baseball or not? Is That's kind of an important skill.
Yep. Well, and if you can hit, you got a chance. And then if you're a
Yeah,
good baseball player on top of that, so
yeah.
well, I've enjoyed this tremendously, Sean. Thank you for taking the time and for putting this all together. And gosh, just bringing this 20 years of prep baseball, kind of, because I think the thing that gets lost too is you were the main guy doing this for how long? In Illinois, going out to these games until Steve Nielsen. Were there any other guys before that were like helping you go track down a game? Because you were going to Teutopolis, you were going to Harrisburg, you were, going
Yeah.
all across the state. Like you built this from the ground up, from being boots on the ground. And now, I mean, I'm sitting here with Tyler, with Pete, with Gavin. We've got other guys that can go out to games, and we're able to see more. But just thinking about that and how you were that solo man on a mission, tracking all these guys down is so impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my record high was 115 games in a high school spring. So,
It's wild stuff.
Gavin, let's get after it. Let's go. Let's even get triple digits. No, it was me for a while, for a long time, and then, but then, I had some other kind of reporters going out and doing the daily roundups and stuff like that. But but nothing beats just sitting there and seeing it with your own eyes. And then
Absolutely.
if you could see a game with someone who's smarter than you and who knows more, like, longtime scouts, and just pick their brain and ask a lot of questions, if you're um, and you just listen and watch, and then the more kind of library, 20 years, it makes me feel old. But yeah, it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Good stuff, and thank you for hopping on. And if there's any other guys that we missed here, we might have to bring you back on and do a little
Yeah,
shorter version of
yeah,
this or something.
yeah. Make sure we put the messages in the YouTube, and we'll respond, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, comment. Who do we
Comment.
miss? Yeah,
Yeah.
who the heck
It
did we
helps
miss?
it
There's
helps
so
the
many out there.
algorithm if you
What's that?
comment. It helps the algorithm, I'm told.
There you go.
So
Yep. Well, Gavin, anything else for us here,
Yeah.
or you want to
Dunk, do you
sign us
have
off?
do you have a sec if we ask you a couple
Oh,
questions? Do you
yeah,
have?
I'd love to.
So first off, appreciate this. I think we all just wanted to kind of listen to you talk about these guys. That was awesome to listen to. But my question for you is, what were like your initial visions for the company? And looking at it now, after 20 years, is it what you expected? Is it bigger? Like, what was that? What was your first initial plan with this?
Um, Good question. Um, for the first, the company is nowhere where I thought it was going to be. Um, for the first decade plus, you're literally just in survive and advance mode, right? Make it to the next month. Um, and and then when we started bringing on other people, it wasn't just me. We start bringing on other people and having to pay other people, and then it's just like, okay, can we make payroll? But really, um, so no, the answer to your question is I had no idea it was going to kind of evolve to where it was, but um, I knew I had something that was a decent thought, which was, you know, let's focus on the player through like a media outlet. Back in the day, it was a magazine. People still say some old timers will still say it's the best bathroom reading material. They just kept it right next to the and every time they educated themselves on um, Illinois high school players. And so I'm super, super grateful to the Illinois high school coaches that embraced it um, before they even knew anything. I would send out paper questionnaires, and I would get a handful back. And not surprisingly, the handfuls back that you got back were always the best programs because they cared about promoting their players. The Mike Zunica at St. Rita and Jeff Bonebrake at Bennett and Brian Hurry and Coach and Smitty at Pravi. Like these are the guys that Coach Hawkins and Funk at Edwardsville. It's like these guys. If people didn't send back questionnaires, I wouldn't have any information. Now, obviously, I would go out and see it, but I didn't even know what I was seeing because so I needed some context. So it's the old the old guard of coaches. And by the way, like some of the guys that I scouted are now high school coaches now at the state level. Like I saw like Brian Lorenz is a coach out there, and
yeah.
hell of like one of the all-time great athletes from Lincoln Way East.
We got Ryan Cutt is coaching Lincoln Way Central now. Just
Really?
got the job at Lincoln
And,
Way Central. I saw that.
and
Ryan Cutt.
good for him because
Yeah,
that was a name that should be on one of the all-time great
totally.
performers,
Yep.
4-year performer. But yeah, that totally ages me. But it's been a one step in front of the other, and using kind of the media to kind of drive the events but at the core of it all. And I know it kind of gets lost um, in all the events that we run and tournaments and all that stuff is at the heart of what we are and who we are. We're a scouting company first, right? So, and scouting these days comes in all forms and fashion, but I'd like to say we advocate for players. We don't make them up, right? You are who you are, and we could project and daydream, but we're not going to lie about them. We might do what our mama told us back when we were growing up. If you don't mean something nice to say, don't say it at all. So stuff gets left on the cutting room floor a lot, which, I'm sure your phones get burned up on getting the true info on players, but is like helping players. If you help players ascend to where they're going to go, the lights are going to always be on. And and to this day, that is our core tenet is to promote players and be the authoritative voice of high school baseball in the state that you reside. And that is, and when we did it in Illinois, we did it in Indiana, and then we started to do it like a game of Risk, like having connectivity state to state to state. So it's been a long, arduous path, but I'm super proud of where we're at, and largely because like the thing that I'm most proud of is the humans that we have in our organization. Drew, you've been here for a decade, which blows me away. A funny story about Drew Locascio, Gavin.
Oh boy, there's plenty of them.
Is, when you guys are so young now, but like when you're in the game of baseball for a long period of time, there's 0 degrees of separation. And I remember I went down to Indiana to help the Indiana boys run their big preseason event. And I told them, and it was in a high school gym, and so it was a bit of a cluster to kind of organize it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to send every hitter up to the hitting area, and I will evaluate every single hitter there. By the way, Cody Hosey was there. He wasn't that famous, and a few other kids, but one of the BP guys was this JUCO guy named Drew Locascio, who threw BP. I don't know. I was up there for 5 straight hours evaluating hitter. You probably threw half of that.
Yeah,
right?
It felt like 5 hours,
Yeah.
but yeah, I could not believe that these bats just kept filtering into this cage, Sean.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And I just kept the train moving
Yep.
and evaluating. I'm like, hey, we need 4 more for this kid. Let's go. And
Yep.
you just kept throwing strikes. And that's the first time I ever met Drew, was there. And then, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later,
Well,
thanks to a strong recommendation to your boy, Skylar Mead, called
Yes,
me
sir.
up and said, you need to hire this guy. And I said, okay, Skylar, whatever you say.
well, and it's fun for me because my introduction into Prep Baseball Report was working for Indiana. Working for Phil Wade over there and Blake Hippler and even Rosenthal when he was kind of doing it, Mitch. So, I getting that experience and seeing what they were all about, it was always something that even as I was a college coach thinking, man, would this be something I would love to do? Because I always had great experiences. And yeah, that was definitely a memorable day throwing. I got my money's worth on that day at that.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was,
You
Hamilton
ruined your own
Southeastern.
action for life because I think,
Well, it's never been good, but it definitely didn't get better after that day.
yeah. Hey, but all joking aside, I mean, the 3 of you guys, like, you guys are keeping the tradition. Illinois is where it all started, and I'm proud of it. And there's a certain level of gold standard that we like to pride ourselves in. Steve Nielsen and Ryan Quigley before was here for a minute. He's at JCA, and just the tradition of Illinois is like where it starts at, and you guys absolutely crush it. And super proud of how, because you guys have taken it to a much higher level than I ever did, when I was doing it. So thank you guys for everything you guys do.
Well, I think the biggest thing from where I sit is you've given us, and you always have given us, the tools to succeed and the tools to elevate and the manpower to get it done, and always the forward thinking. And I know we're in a great position here, and we're led by by a someone who's never gonna be settled, be satisfied, and that is great to know. So I want to thank you because I mean you took a shot on me, like we're talking about a strong recommendation, and that's always just kind of been my thing is just make sure I'm doing it the way Sean wants it done, and that's all we're really trying to do over here.
Yeah, no, I think some of my answers already got questioned or answered throughout, but
Yeah.
Tyler or Pete, like if you guys have anything you want to bring up.
Yeah, I would love to hear you just talk a little more about what it was like having or like your main ways of finding players, I guess, because it was just you for a while, right? Social media was not as prevalent as it was. You mentioned like,
exist.
yeah, right. So you mentioned that the Ace had you out for a personal scout day. I remember Rob Rooney with Long Shots had mentioned that you would just pop into the perfect swing every now and again. So just talk to me about how like what it was like, kind of just out there, kind of in the Wild West, just like trying to find all these guys.
Yeah. I mean, you try to find trusted sources, right, of information. But, scouting is we're just information collectors at the end of the day, right? You collect information and then it's whether or not you act on that information that you get. Now, I just was hardwired like I was a bit I was a bit of a psycho where if I got a tip on something, now half the time it was wrong, right, from high school coaches, but like I needed it. Like I would go into, as you mentioned, Rooney. Like I would go and pop in if they told me they had guys. I would go. Like Nick Birdie is like, hey, I got a sophomore. Hey, Fritz Stadler, I got this tall, uber athletic kid. You got to check him out. I watched him go in there and just run PFPs. That's all he did. And I was
He
like,
was my
he's a
throwing
dude.
partner.
Um, uh, I was there. Um, so um, um, so I just went everywhere. I tried to be everywhere and then you start like evaluating your sources, right? Like there's a certain high school coach that would say he's mid to upper 80s, and I would get there. I wasted, uh, at least 2 weeks of my life on a day, if days going and seeing his guy, and it was 80, 82, and it was bad. So like people that are who feed you accurate information. Um, David Seifert was a huge when he was an area guy. Seifert, um, he would help me a lot. Because he was not a pack rat guy who would just follow the pack. He was always in the Rockfords, and he'd call me up and he'd say, "Hey, I got a guy, a top 5 round guy, slated, and you don't even have him ranked." And I said, oh crap. Who is it? Matt Brill from um, um,
Moline, right?
Moline.
Yeah, I recruited him at JUCO. That
Yeah,
was a little above
Matt
my
Brill.
skis.
And he's, so you have these like near, because like I always viewed it as like the only way to grow the business was to increase the credibility, and your list is the way to show your credibility. Now you're going to be wrong a lot, but at least you can say you saw, right? But there's at certain times like you get information, you just have to act on it. Like the Eric Kaiser, he was blowing up, drove to Waterloo, like so, and you just have to act on it. But in those preseason questionnaires, I would rely on those a ton from the high school coaches, and try to ingratiate myself with hitting facilities and travel ball coaches who would want to talk to me. And some people didn't. And there's a not more than a handful of high school coaches that refuse to send in a questionnaire. And I'd ask them why. And they'd be like, I don't want people knowing about my players. And I would ask them like, well, why are you in this then? Like, why are you like, so but yeah, that's how I'd find it, and like every bit of information matters, um and whether or not it's good or bad, at least you have data points on whatever, and then you just have to organize your data points well, just come up with an internal system.
Dunk Super 60's right around the corner, and we kind of touched on some of the Illinois guys that over the years have stood out. I just want to know nationally, like maybe some guys outside of the state that, man, you're thinking back to their Super 60 performances and it's like, gosh, that was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, um, the first ones that come to mind, and some of these guys didn't pan out and some of them did. Like to me, like I've changed my thought on like I used to think that, the stars have to perfectly align for you to make the big leagues. And so I never thought like anybody was going to make the big leagues. And now I see some guys that make the big leagues who make it, and are doing great. Um, to me, Trey Ball was the biggest no doubter, 6'6", uber athletic, ran around center field like Andy Van Slyke and could mash. And on the mound, he was a no-brainer on the mound and didn't make it, right? Like Trey Ball out of Indiana. I think the Red Sox took him 8th overall. Justin O'Connor.
I was going to ask because he was another Indiana guy.
But he was the guy. He was the other no-brainer because he was a catcher, pitcher, and shortstop. And you're like, I don't know what he's better at, but he set records in just about every category at the time. And similarly, like to take credit, but like Tucker Barnhart was a famous guy, like one of the more famous guys to come, and had a terrible showing. And you're like, oh my God, did we hurt him? And he still went in the 8th round. Trying to think. More recently, like Braden Montgomery had to have one of the greatest performances of all time. And now, nowadays we have all different types of testing, and he tested through the roof on S2 cognition, the cognitive skills, the eye test skills, but then he was a switch hitter with power who was mid-90s on the mound with like there wasn't anything you could say other than he ran a 6'9". So he wasn't like a freakazoid athlete. So I would if you're a card collector, I would buy Braden Montgomery first on him. Matt Vierling was one of the all-time great performances. He's now Tigers, another two-way, just coming off a broken leg. And this was like his first coming out party and ran like a 6'6" and was mid-90s, and on the mound. Trying to think some other ones. Do you have any others, Drew?
So just thinking back, I remember Joey Wentz kind of being a big one because he was always the bat, but then it was what he did on the
Great
mound.
Joey Wentz.
That one sticks out to me. I just remember Jared Kelenic being on a different level as
that's
well.
right. Yeah. That Jared Kelenic's junior and senior years, it was probably
Special.
the best.
Yeah.
Maybe like top 3 of all time. Yeah.
Those are some that really stick out to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And a name that we didn't mention, and he's kind of struggling a little bit in pro ball, but Ben Hernandez, this Chicago kid who it was that performance was as good as it gets on the mound.
And I mean, want to talk about a guy just skyrocketing off the Super 60? Blake Walters has to be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Somebody that made the most money for themselves coming to that event. He's got to be up there. I know there's a lot, but
and I was just talking to at ABCA. I was talking to the Royals crosschecker, and I asked about him, and he told me he's special, and they just got to make sure because he's such a great kid, right? And you got to slow it down, and but because he was invited 2 days before.
It was
right?
late. I know they were making a push. He worked out with Anthony Silkwood, and we had a good relationship with Silkwood, and he'd be texting us bullpens, and all of a sudden he's texting us like, "Hey, it's like 95, and like he needs to be here." We're like, "Okay." none of us thought he'd touch a 97.7 and set the fastball record like he did. But so happy for him because, I mean, you said just such a good kid. And I'll never forget watching him down in Rantoul being 82, 84 as a sophomore and going up to Silkwood, who was coaching him with the Yard Goats, and just being like, who is this guy? The body looked right. It all looked right, but 82, 84, and to see what he did is just, you love to see that because, he was one, I felt like that just went to such a high level kind of out of nowhere. Brendan Tunick, but that was more like before the future games. Newman Central Catholic, like I saw a Twitter video of him, and then we finally saw him in Rantoul, and I'm like, hey, come to this event for free. We got to see what these tools are like. Like, I really like the way it looks, and then got him to the future games, and he just kept getting better. So those are just feel good stories.
Remember at the future games, because I was sitting on a field, I was like, my favorite hitter in this entire event might be that your Brennan Tunick kid, because he just, in BP, he just went around the world.
Yep.
Pull, right center, center, left. It was just unreal. So, never had a Newman Catholic kid in the history that I was running it. So I like seeing small school names do it. So yeah, that's a good call out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's been a fun ride, and the players. It's all about the players, right? And so the players make it fun, or not fun. When you're sitting at a 3.5 hour spring game and you're thinking like, what am I doing with my life? There's no one who's thrown a strike, and it's 17-12 with 20 walks in a game. And you're like, why haven't I left yet? But you always see something when you don't leave. So anyway, thank you guys for having me. This was a blast to just walk down memory lane, and so thanks for having me, and I'm happy to hop on if you ever need a plug on a hole, and
awesome.
if you don't want to talk,
awesome.
So,
well, thank you, Sean. It was great having you. Awesome stuff. Great to reminisce. I miss these type of conversations in the office that we would have every once in a while, and definitely brings back some memories. So thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.